The afternoon sun filtered through the lace curtains of the Miller family home, casting gentle patterns across the worn hardwood floors. Margaret sat in her favorite armchair, watching the clock on the mantel tick steadily forward. Any moment now, her daughter Rachel would arrive with her husband Tom and their son Daniel for the monthly family dinner. At 72, Margaret had learned to treasure these gatherings. Her husband Harold, 75, and still sharp as ever despite his thinning white hair and the reading glasses perpetually perched on his nose, was in the kitchen checking on the roast. The aroma of herbs and slow-cooked beef filled the house, mingling with the scent of Margaret's homemade apple pie cooling on the counter. Harold emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a dish towel. His flannel shirt was neatly pressed, the way he'd worn them for 50 years of marriage. He settled into his recliner with a satisfied sigh, glancing out the window toward the driveway. "Should be here any minute," Margaret said softly, smoothing her flowered dress. Rachel said they'd leave right after Daniel finished his music lesson. Harold nodded, a contented smile crossing his weathered face. "That boy and his piano. Takes after your side of the family, Maggie. Musical talent like that." They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that comes from decades of understanding. The clock chimed 3 times. Harold's eyes drifted to the window again, expecting to see the familiar silver BMW pull into the driveway. Instead, a yellow taxicab rolled to a stop in front of their house. Harold straightened in his chair, his brow furrowing. "That's odd." Margaret leaned forward, watching as Rachel stepped out of the cab, followed by Tom and Daniel. Rachel paid the driver while Tom helped Daniel with his backpack. The taxi pulled away, leaving the 3 of them standing at the edge of the lawn. Harold was already on his feet, moving toward the front door with surprising speed for a man his age. He pushed open the screen door just as Rachel reached the porch steps. "Rachel!" Harold called out, his voice filled with genuine confusion. "Why did you come by taxi? What happened to the BMW we gave you for your birthday?" The question hung in the air like morning fog. Rachel froze on the bottom step, her hand gripping the railing. She was 48, with gentle lines around her eyes that spoke of years of laughter and care. Her auburn hair, touched with strands of silver, was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore a modest blue cardigan over a white blouse, practical and unpretentious. Behind her, Tom stood silent, his tall frame slightly stooped as if carrying an invisible weight. Daniel, 14 and lanky, looked down at his sneakers. Margaret appeared in the doorway beside Harold, sensing the sudden tension. "Dear, what's wrong?" Rachel's eyes glistened. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words seemed stuck somewhere deep in her throat. Finally, she managed a trembling smile. "Can we come inside, Dad? There's something we need to tell you." Harold's face shifted from confusion to concern. Of course, come in." They filed into the living room, that familiar space filled with 50 years of memories. Wedding photos on the walls, grandchildren's artwork on the refrigerator, a lifetime of love contained within these walls. Rachel sat on the sofa, Tom beside her, Daniel between them. The boy looked pale, worried. Margaret lowered herself into her chair, hands folded in her lap. Harold remained standing, waiting. Rachel took a deep breath. "Dad, Mom, the car is gone. We don't have it anymore." "Gone?" Harold repeated. "Was it stolen? Did you have an accident?" "No, nothing like that," Rachel said quickly. She reached for Tom's hand, drawing strength from his steady presence. "We gave it away." The silence that followed was profound. Margaret's hand went to her chest. Harold's eyes widened behind his glasses. "You gave away the car?" Harold's voice was barely above a whisper. "The BMW? The one we saved for months to buy you? Your birthday present?" Rachel nodded, tears now streaming freely down her cheeks. "I know how much that car meant to you, how much thought you put into choosing it. I know you wanted me to have something nice, something reliable. And I loved it, Dad, I truly did. Then why?" Margaret's voice was soft, bewildered. Rachel looked at Tom, then at Daniel, then back to her parents. Because someone needed it more than I did. Harold slowly sank into his recliner. I don't understand. Rachel wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Do you remember me mentioning my coworker Linda, the woman I've been working with at the community center for the past 2 years? Margaret nodded. The single mother? Yes, Rachel continued. Linda has 2 daughters. Emma is 16, and Sophie just turned 11. For the past year, Linda has been taking the bus to work. 3 different buses, actually. It takes her nearly 2 hours each way. She leaves her house at 5 in the morning to make sure she's at work by 8. Then she does her full shift, takes 3 buses home, and usually doesn't get back until 7 in the evening. Harold listened, his expression unreadable. The girls have been staying with a neighbor during the day, Rachel went on. But a few weeks ago, Sophie got sick. Really sick. She started having these terrible headaches, and Linda took her to the emergency room. They ran tests and found that Sophie has a brain tumor. Margaret gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Oh, that poor child. The doctors said it's treatable, Rachel continued, her voice steadier now. But Sophie needs to go to the children's hospital downtown 3 times a week for treatments. It's 40 minutes away, and the bus routes don't go there directly. Linda was trying to figure out how to make it work, how to take Sophie to these appointments and still keep her job and take care of Emma. Tom spoke for the first time, his deep voice gentle. We saw Linda crying in the break room one day. She was looking at bus schedules, trying to work out some impossible logistics. She'd already missed 2 days of work taking Sophie to appointments, and she was afraid she'd lose her job. Rachel spent that whole night thinking about it, Tom continued. She came to me around midnight and said she had an idea. I'll be honest, when she first suggested giving Linda the car, I thought she was crazy. That was an expensive gift from you folks. A generous gift. But Rachel explained it to me in a way that made perfect sense. Rachel leaned forward, her eyes earnest. Dad, Mom, I have a car. Tom's car works perfectly fine and he can drop me off at work most days. On the days he can't, I can take the bus or get a ride. It's an inconvenience, sure, but it's just that. An inconvenience. For Linda, not having a car wasn't an inconvenience. It was devastating. It was the difference between getting her daughter to treatment and watching her suffer. Harold sat very still, his gnarled hands resting on the arms of his chair. His jaw worked silently, processing everything he'd just heard. I know that car represented something to you, Rachel said, her voice breaking. It was more than just a vehicle. It was a symbol of your love, of wanting to give me something special after all these years of me driving that old station wagon. I know you scrimped and saved, Dad. I know Mom cut coupons and you both gave up things to make that purchase happen. And I will forever be grateful for that love. Tears rolled down Margaret's cheeks now, but she remained quiet. But when I thought about what that car could mean to Linda and her daughters, Rachel continued, I realized it could be so much more than a birthday present. It could be a lifeline. It could mean Sophie gets to her treatments on time. It could mean Linda keeps her job. It could mean Emma doesn't have to grow up watching her mother fall apart from stress and exhaustion. Harold's eyes had grown moist. He removed his glasses and cleaned them with his handkerchief, a gesture Rachel recognized as his way of buying time to compose himself. So 3 days ago, Rachel said, Tom and I invited Linda over to our house. We told her we had something for her. When we handed her the keys to the BMW and explained that it was hers, that she didn't need to pay us back, that we wanted her to have it, she collapsed. She actually fell to her knees in our driveway and sobbed. She kept saying it wasn't possible, that she couldn't accept something so valuable, that it was too much. What did you tell her? Margaret asked quietly. Rachel smiled through her tears. I told her that the car belonged to her now. I told her that every time she drives Sophie to treatment, every time she gets to work on time, every time she picks up Emma from school, she should remember that there are people in this world who care about her and her daughters. I told her that we all need help sometimes, and accepting help with grace is its own kind of strength. Daniel spoke up for the first time, his young voice uncertain but clear. Grandpa, I know you're probably upset, but Mom did the right thing. Last week, Mrs. Linda brought Sophie to our house to say thank you. Sophie was wearing this pink hat because her hair is falling out from the treatments, but she was smiling so big. She said she was going to beat the cancer, and she thanked Mom for giving her the chance to fight without her mom being so worried all the time. The room fell silent again. The clock on the mantel ticked steadily. Somewhere outside, a bird sang. The roast continued cooking in the kitchen, filling the house with warmth. Harold sat motionless in his chair, staring at something only he could see. Margaret watched him, knowing her husband well enough to understand that he was wrestling with something deep inside. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Harold spoke. His voice was rough with emotion. "Rachel, stand up." Rachel rose slowly from the sofa, uncertainty written across her face. She'd expected anger, disappointment, perhaps even a lecture about not appreciating gifts or making rash decisions. She'd prepared herself to defend her choice, to stand firm in her conviction even if it meant disappointing her parents. Harold stood as well, his movements deliberate. He walked across the living room until he stood directly in front of his daughter. For a long moment, he simply looked at her, his weathered face a landscape of complex emotions. Then, without warning, Harold wrapped his arms around Rachel and pulled her into a fierce embrace. His shoulders shook. Margaret realized with a start that her husband was crying. "Dad?" Rachel whispered, confused. Harold's voice was muffled against her shoulder.
Car belongs to Linda now." Rachel pulled back slightly,
Searching her father's face. "What?" Harold's eyes were red, but they shone with something profound. "That car belongs to her now. You did exactly what you should have done. You saw someone drowning and you threw them a rope. You saw a child in need and you helped her. You saw a mother struggling and you lightened her burden." He cupped Rachel's face in his hands, the way he'd done when she was a little girl with scraped knees and hurt feelings. "Do you know why your mother and I saved up for that car? Do you know what we really wanted to give you?" Rachel shook her head, unable to speak. "We wanted to give you security," Harold said. "We wanted to give you the knowledge that you are valued and loved and worthy of nice things. We wanted you to know that even though we're getting older and may not always be here, we tried to leave you with something solid and dependable." He smiled, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. "But you know what you just showed us? You showed us that we already gave you something far more valuable than any car. We gave you a heart that recognizes suffering. We gave you the courage to sacrifice for others. We gave you compassion and generosity and the ability to see beyond your own comfort to someone else's desperation." Margaret was openly weeping now, her handkerchief pressed to her face. Harold continued, his voice growing stronger. "Your mother and I spent months saving money for that BMW. We went without vacations, we ate simple meals, we put off replacing the roof on the garage, and you want to know something? I'd do it all again tomorrow. Because that money didn't buy a car, it bought an opportunity for you to change someone's life. It bought hope for a sick little girl. It bought relief for a desperate mother." He pulled Rachel close again. "I am so proud of you. So incredibly proud. You didn't just inherit our values, you understood them. You took what we tried to teach you about kindness and generosity, and you lived it out in a way that matters." Tom had stood up from the sofa, one arm around Daniel. They watched the scene unfold, both of them with wet eyes. Harold released Rachel and turned to Tom. "And you, son, you supported your wife in this decision. You put someone else's need above your own convenience. That takes a special kind of man." Tom nodded, too moved to speak. Harold looked down at Daniel. "And you, young man? Come here." Daniel approached his grandfather cautiously. Harold put a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You're growing up in a house where you see real compassion in action, where you see your parents make hard choices for the right reasons. That's going to shape the kind of man you become. Don't ever forget what you saw your mother do. I won't, Grandpa, Daniel said solemnly. Margaret finally found her voice. She stood and joined the group, wrapping her arms around Rachel from the other side. My darling girl, I raised you to be kind, but you've exceeded anything I could have hoped for. The five of them stood there in the living room, holding each other, crying and laughing at the same time. The afternoon sun had shifted, now streaming through the western windows, bathing them all in golden light. After a while they separated, wiping eyes and blowing noses. Margaret bustled toward the kitchen. The roast must be ready by now. Let's eat while it's hot, and I want to hear more about Linda and her daughters. Over dinner, Rachel told them everything. She explained how Linda had fled an abusive marriage 5 years earlier, starting over with nothing but her 2 daughters and her determination to build a better life. She described how Linda worked 2 jobs at one point, how she never complained, how she always put her daughters first. She told them about Emma, who was studying hard to get into college, hoping to become a nurse. About how Emma had taken on extra responsibilities at home, helping care for Sophie during her treatments, never once complaining about her own sacrifices. And she told them about Sophie, bright and brave despite her illness, who kept a journal where she wrote down all the things she was grateful for. At the top of her most recent list was written, Mrs. Rachel's kindness and the car that takes me to get better. Harold and Margaret listened to every word, asking questions, their faces reflecting the full spectrum of human emotion: pride, sorrow, hope, determination. As they cleared the dinner plates, Harold excused himself for a moment. He went to his small office off the living room and returned with his checkbook. He sat down at the dining table and began writing. Dad, what are you doing? Rachel asked. Harold didn't look up. I'm writing a check for the hospital bills. For Sophie's treatments. Dad, you don't have to do that. Harold finished writing and looked up at his daughter. I know I don't have to. I want to. You gave away a car to help this family. The least your mother and I can do is help with the medical expenses. Besides, what are we going to do with our money? We have everything we need. A comfortable home, good health for our age, and a daughter who makes us proud every single day. Margaret nodded in agreement. We've been looking for a way to make a difference, to do something meaningful. This is it. Rachel began to cry again, but this time with overwhelming gratitude. Thank you so much. Linda will be so relieved. Harold folded the check and handed it to Rachel. You give this to Linda tomorrow, and you tell her something for me. You tell her that she's doing a wonderful job raising those girls. You tell her that struggling doesn't mean failing. You tell her that accepting help is not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of wisdom. And you tell her that Harold and Margaret Miller are honored to help her and her daughters in any way we can. Tom, who had been quiet through most of the meal, cleared his throat. You folks are remarkable. You really are. Harold waved dismissively. We're just trying to do what's right. Same as Rachel did, same as you did by supporting her decision. They moved to the living room for dessert. Margaret served her apple pie with vanilla ice cream, and they talked late into the evening. The conversation ranged from memories of Rachel's childhood, to hopes for Daniel's future, to plans for helping Linda's family beyond just the car and medical bills. As the sky outside darkened and the living room lamps cast their warm glow, Harold looked around at his family with deep contentment. This was what mattered. Not possessions or status or accumulating wealth, but connections, compassion. The ability to recognize need and respond to it with generosity. When it was time for Rachel, Tom, and Daniel to leave, Harold walked them to the door. A taxi was coming to pick them up, arranged earlier in the evening. We'll figure out a car situation soon, Rachel said. Tom and I have been talking about what we can afford, and we'll work it out. Harold put his hand on Rachel's shoulder. You'll work it out. You always do. And in the meantime, if you need to borrow our car, you just say the word. It sits in the garage most days anyway. Thanks, Dad. The taxi arrived, its headlights sweeping across the front lawn. Before Rachel could step off the porch, Harold stopped her one more time. Rachel, I need you to understand something. When your mother and I gave you that BMW, we thought we were giving you a car. But what we really gave you was a choice. You could have kept it and enjoyed it, and that would have been perfectly fine. But you chose to pass on that gift to someone who needed it more. You multiplied our generosity, made it bigger and more meaningful than it ever could have been just sitting in your driveway. He smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. That car might have your sister's name on it now, but it still represents our love for you. Every mile Linda drives represents the values we tried to instill in you. Every trip to the hospital for Sophie represents the kind of person you've become. We couldn't be prouder if we tried. Rachel hugged her father tightly. I love you, Dad. Thank you for understanding. I love you too, sweetheart. Now go on, don't keep the taxi waiting. Harold and Margaret stood on the porch, arms around each other's waists, watching as the taxi pulled away. They waved until the taillights disappeared around the corner. Back inside, as they cleaned up the last of the dinner dishes, Margaret spoke softly. You know, Harold, I was upset at first. When we saw them get out of that taxi, I felt this flash of anger. How could she give away something so expensive, something we worked so hard to give her? Harold nodded, drying a plate. I felt the same way. For about 30 seconds, I was genuinely angry. But then she explained, Margaret continued, and I realized that we raised her right. We taught her what really matters in life. We showed her how to care for others. And she took those lessons to heart. Harold set down the plate and turned to his wife. You know what I realized today, Maggie? I realized that the best gift we can give our children isn't money or cars or things. It's character. It's teaching them to see beyond themselves. Rachel did that today. She looked beyond her own comfort and convenience and saw a family in crisis. And she acted. That's the real gift we gave her. Margaret leaned her head against her husband's shoulder. We did good, didn't we? We did very good. The next morning, Rachel arrived at the community center where she worked. Linda was already there, organizing supplies for the day's activities. When Linda saw Rachel, her face lit up with a smile that reached her eyes, chasing away the permanent worry lines that had lived there for so long. Rachel, good morning. Morning, Linda. Do you have a minute? I need to talk to you. They stepped into a quiet office. Rachel pulled out the check her father had written. This is from my parents. They want to help with Sophie's medical bills. Linda looked at the check and her knees buckled. Rachel caught her arm, steadying her. The amount was substantial, enough to cover several months of treatments and medications. Rachel, I can't, Linda whispered. The car was already too much. This is, Linda, stop, Rachel said gently but firmly. My father wanted me to tell you something. He said you're doing a wonderful job raising your girls. He said struggling doesn't mean failing. And he said accepting help is not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of wisdom. Linda broke down, sobbing into her hands. Rachel held her, letting her cry out months of accumulated stress and fear. Why are you being so kind to me? Linda finally managed. Why are you and your family doing all this? Rachel thought carefully before answering. Because we can, because you need it, and because helping each other is what makes us human. My parents didn't have much when I was growing up, but they always found ways to help neighbors, to support friends going through hard times. They taught me that we're all connected, and when one of us suffers, we all suffer. When one of us heals, we all heal. Linda wiped her eyes. I will pay this back somehow. I promise you, I will. No, Rachel said. This isn't a loan, it's a gift. The only thing I ask is that someday when you're in a position to help someone else, you do it. Pay it forward. That's how this works. Linda nodded, clutching the check to her chest. I will. I promise I will. Weeks turned into months. Sophie's treatments continued, and slowly, miraculously, the tumor began to shrink. Linda drove her daughter to every appointment in the BMW, grateful beyond words for the reliability of the vehicle and the kindness that had put it in her hands. Emma excelled in school. her grades improving now that her mother's stress had lessened, and Sophie's health was stabilizing. She applied to nursing school and was accepted with a partial scholarship. Harold and Margaret became unofficial grandparents to Linda's girls. They invited the family over for monthly dinners, creating new traditions and forging bonds that transcended blood relation. Sophie would sit with Harold in his recliner, telling him about her treatments and her dreams for the future. Emma would help Margaret in the garden, learning about plants and life from a woman who had weathered her own storms with grace. Rachel and Tom eventually bought a modest used car for themselves. It wasn't as fancy as the BMW had been, but it ran well and got them where they needed to go. Rachel never once regretted her decision. One evening, about a year after Sophie's diagnosis, Harold answered a knock at the door to find Linda and her daughters standing on the porch. Sophie's hair had grown back, thick and curly. She wore it pulled back with a bright yellow ribbon. Emma was in her nursing school uniform, having just come from clinical rotations at the hospital. "We wanted to thank you in person," Linda said. "Sophie has been declared cancer-free. The doctors say her prognosis is excellent." Margaret appeared in the doorway, and Sophie launched herself into the older woman's arms. "Miss Margaret, I'm all better. I'm going to be okay." There were tears and hugs and laughter. They all crowded into the living room, that familiar space that had become a sanctuary for two families who had found each other through hardship and kindness. Sophie presented Harold with a drawing she'd made. It showed a silver car with angel wings surrounded by hearts. At the bottom, in careful child's handwriting, she had written, "Thank you for saving my life." Harold's eyes filled with tears as he looked at the drawing. He carefully placed it on the mantel, right in the center where he could see it every day. "You know what this taught me?" Harold said to the room. "It taught me that we never really own anything in this life. We're just temporary stewards of resources, money, possessions. Our job isn't to hoard them or guard them. Our job is to use them in ways that matter, to create ripples of goodness that spread far beyond what we can see." He looked at Linda. "You've raised two incredible daughters. You've worked hard and never given up, even when things were impossibly difficult. That's what real strength looks like." He looked at Sophie. "And you, young lady, you fought like a warrior. You never lost hope. That's what courage looks like." He looked at Emma. "And you stepped up to help your family when they needed you most. You put others before yourself. That's what love looks like." Finally, he looked at Rachel, Tom, and Daniel. "And my family showed me that the values your grandmother and I tried to live by actually took root. They grew into something beautiful and strong. That's what legacy looks like." The evening stretched on, filled with conversation and shared meals, and the kind of deep contentment that comes from knowing you're exactly where you're supposed to be, with exactly the people you're meant to be with. As the families said their goodbyes that night, Harold pulled Rachel aside one more time. "You asked me once if I was upset about the car," he said. "The truth is, for a moment I was. But then you explained, and I understood that you had taken something we gave you and transformed it into something far more valuable. You turned a material possession into hope. You turned an expense into an investment in human life. You turned our small act of generosity into something that saved a family." He squeezed her hand. "That BMW was just a car. But what you did with it became a miracle. That's the difference between having things and using things wisely. That's the difference between receiving gifts and multiplying their impact." Rachel smiled. "I learned from the best teachers." "No," Harold said. "You learned the lessons, but you applied them in your own way. That's what made the difference. That's what made us so proud." Harold and Margaret stood on their porch once again, watching as their extended family dispersed into the night. The silver BMW pulled out of the driveway, Linda at the wheel, her daughters in the back seat, all of them waving. Margaret leaned against her husband. "We've been blessed, haven't we?" "More than we ever deserved," Harold agreed. "Do you think we made a difference?" Harold thought about Sophie's drawing on the mantel. He thought about Emma's nursing school uniform. He thought about Linda's smile, so different from the desperate tears he'd heard about from months ago. He thought about his daughter Rachel, who had been willing to sacrifice for someone she barely knew. "I think we did," he said. "I think we're still making a difference. Every day, in small ways and big ways. That's all any of us can do. Try to leave the world a little better than we found it. Try to ease someone's suffering. Try to multiply kindness instead of hoarding it." They went inside, closing the door on another day, grateful for their years together, for the family they'd raised, and for the unexpected ways that simple acts of generosity could transform lives. The silver BMW continued to serve Linda and her daughters well. But more than that, it served as a daily reminder that in a world that often feels cold and indifferent, there are still people who care. There are still families who reach out to help. There are still moments when sacrifice and compassion can change everything. And somewhere in heaven, if such things are recorded, there was a note made about Harold and Margaret Miller, about their daughter Rachel and her family, and about the day a birthday present became so much more than a car. It became hope. It became healing. It became a testament to the enduring power of human kindness. Years later, when Sophie graduated from high school with honors, she gave a speech about gratitude and second chances. She talked about a woman named Rachel, who gave away her car to help a sick child. She talked about Harold and Margaret, who covered medical bills for a family they'd never met. She talked about how their generosity didn't just save her life, it taught her how to live. Rachel sat in the audience that day, tears streaming down her face, holding hands with her aging parents. Harold leaned over and whispered, "See what you started?" Rachel whispered back, "No, Dad, see what you started. I was just passing it on." And that really is the point of it all. We receive kindness, and we pass it on. We experience generosity, and we multiply it. We are helped in our time of need, and we help others in theirs. That's how the world becomes better. Not through grand gestures or dramatic pronouncements, but through simple acts of compassion, repeated again and again, creating ripples that spread farther than we ever imagine. The BMW eventually wore out, as all cars do. But the kindness that surrounded it, the lives it touched, the hope it carried, those things endured. They became part of the story that Linda told her grandchildren. They became part of the example that Rachel set for Daniel, who grew up to be a man who looked for ways to help others. They became part of the legacy that Harold and Margaret left behind, a legacy measured not in money or possessions, but in changed hearts and transformed lives. That's what real wealth looks like. That's what a life well lived means. And that's what one family discovered on the day a simple question, "Why did you come by taxi?" led to an answer that revealed the very best of human nature. If this story touched your heart and reminded you of what truly matters in life, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear this message of hope and kindness today. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that celebrate the goodness in humanity. And leave a comment below, telling us about a time when someone's generosity changed your life, or when you had the chance to help someone in need. Your stories inspire us all to be better and do better.